We're talking with Kim Grist. Hi, Kim. How are you?
Good morning. Doing good.
Great. You've published a couple books with us at Barr26 Publishing and also have the audio versions out. And I wanted to, before we get to the specific books, I just wanted to get a little bit of your background and how long you've been writing and what else you've done.
Okay. Well, I've always enjoyed writing, but I kept putting off the dream of writing a book or a story. I was always good at, I'm one of 7 children. And if you want to get a word in edgewise, you have to be quick and you have to be funny.
Okay.
In my family, it was loud and boisterous. And so you had to sort of to elbow your way in. So I enjoyed telling stories from the time I was a little girl, but I didn't actually start writing until 2017. A couple of things happened. My oldest son was diagnosed with a terminal cancer. And then my baby brother took his life. He was a soldier and suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder. And those two things just sort of shook me. And I thought, well, life is, you use a cliche, life is short.
Yeah.
But that just sort of motivated me to pursue my dream. And when I write, it's more about encouraging people and using humor. I love history. My husband was a history teacher for years, and we're kind of nerds in that way. I'd be a much better student now. My any teachers that might be listening, they'd be going, seriously, she's doing what? As far as like what I enjoyed as a child, I read anything that I could get my hands on. But I've always liked the Westerns, and always enjoyed that time frame, probably because my grandmothers and grandfathers told so many stories about the time frame in the late 19th century that they went through. So a lot of stories I use are I said 18th century. I'm sorry. But I had stories from my grandfather who told about his family, and then I have one mischievous grandmother. I'm not sure how many of the stories were true, but they were always really good stories.
Okay. Did you have any when you started? This is fairly recent for you then.
Yeah. It was way past the 50s.
Oh, okay. And that's great that you can just kind of do that, have a whole shift in what you're doing with your life and just go for it, like you said.
Right. I mean, if not now, then when? I mean, I could have just never done anything. Yeah. I thought, well, I'm going to give it a shot. I'm going to try.
Good.
What's the worst thing that can happen to me? Is not do well.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah. The benefits would far outweigh the risks, it would seem. So did you have any clear goals in mind or any metrics for success when you first started writing?
I think I had so many stories in my head. I just wanted to try to get some of them on paper. And but my goal has always been to share the reason for my hope, and that is from a Christian perspective. And so, but my idea was that my stories would combine faith, friends, and I call it good, clean fun with historical. And it's minor in the romance, but the romance is fun. I don't have a lot of characters that are dysfunctional. I like to use characters that seem real. And a lot of times I know I find myself creating them from one of 2 grandmothers. My grandmother on my mother's side was sort of a woman ahead of her time. She was well educated, had a college education. That was not typical at the time. And she was a nurse during World War II. My other grandmother, same age, was more typical. She had an 8th grade education, was a mill worker. But both of them had strong backgrounds and faith, and they made the most of what they had. So I like my characters to be that way, just typical, ordinary people. That sometimes life stinks, but we're going to make the best bad things happen. We're going to pull out of it
Yeah.
And it's everything may not be okay, but everything's going to be fine.
I get that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it makes sense. The it seems like during the war, of course, everybody kind of pulled together and did what they needed to do.
Oh, sure.
And so it's understandable you would admire them and want to build characters off of them.
Yeah, and what, like I said, one character is a lot more stellar and sort of like you could make a good old fashioned John Wayne movie out of, and the
Hmm.
other one's a lot more mischievous. And so I enjoy bringing some of that into my characters as well.
Yeah. So the main book that you have with us is Audie's Audacious Bride,
Right,
and that's with the Matchmaker's Mix-Up series.
right. I
When
love that
did?
series.
Oh yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Hmm.
When did you write Audie's Audacious Bride?
That was last year.
Okay, so fairly recent.
Hmm.
Tell us a little bit about the story and kind of the series as a whole.
Well, the series as a whole is Matchmaker, and during that time after the Civil War, so many women. There were so many women in the East, and so few men, based on whether the men had not come back from war or when they came home, their lives and livelihood were destroyed, so they went west to pursue another dream. And so the women were often left with, no idea for no one to choose as a husband. And in those time frames, you really didn't have a lot of jobs that a woman could do. So she was raised to, when she's going to grow up, she's going to get married and she's going to raise a family. So the mail order bride became common. And so, but in the mix-up series, there's a matchmaker who's really good. She's got a great reputation, and she matches people well. But through an illness that's happened, her cat comes in, and if you can imagine index cards, she has everything set up, and her cat comes in and topples things over, and she is unable to recover from that. And her granddaughter, and actually has a stroke and is set back. And her granddaughter says, "No worries, I'll help you. You've got all these notes. We're going to take care of it." And so the granddaughter really doesn't know what she's doing. But like a lot of young folks, well, I've got this, Grandma, don't worry. And so she begins to match things up the way that she thinks it would be best. And so what I end up with is a bride who is a pastor's daughter. And I relied on a lot of things. And my husband is a former high school football coach, but at the age of 40 became a pastor. He went back to school. We had a complete different lifestyle change. We had to, so that my husband could go to school, we sold everything. And my kids thought, as Dave Ramsey said, that we were going to sell them. We had a completely different life change. But, so I take a lot of the things that happen to me as a pastor's wife. And so I applied those to this particular bride. She also has a sister. They were left destitute after the war, and her father passed away. They have no place to go. Pastors typically don't make a lot of money. Now there's some that do, but typically you don't make a lot of money. So they didn't have anybody to fall back on. No funds. They were going to be destitute. So they had to take on this matchmaker. That was their best source to help them to find somebody where they could go and live safely. The confusion, though, is that this particular bride wants to be somewhere where she can live close by in town, and she's got a lot of skills. She's good at math. She's likes to be around people. She's vivacious, and she doesn't want to go to she's grown up on a farm set away from people, or a town set away from people. She likes to be a part of the town and around people. But she's mismatched to a rancher who lives in a remote location. And she's also she likes children, but she thinks she would not like to marry anyone who already has children, just because she feels like that it would be too much. She's going to be married, a newly married person. She wants to start out, fresh. but she's actually mismatched to this rancher who's raising his sister. So there's some complications there.
Wow. Yeah. Huh. It's certainly an interesting twist. It's just the whole cat thing in the index cards. That's pretty fun.
Well, I can see my cat doing something like that. She's notorious for knocking things over.
Oh,
so
yeah.
I could see it.
I've got a couple of them as well, and it's I've lost too many pens to count.
Well, and you got to think about too, during this time frame, they certainly wouldn't have anything like we have. Computers, they would have index cards, and you know, if they get turned over, you got to figure out how to, set things straight.
So when you started this book, were there kind of guidelines as far as making it compatible with the other books in the series? There's a lot of different authors involved, right?
There are.
Okay. So how did you manage that?
Well, everybody's prologue was similar, that Agatha the matchmaker and the time frame, and that it was going to be a mail order bride type story, which are one of my favorite ones to read. So, and then there were so many word count that was specific, but basically you were allowed to, use your imagination and come up with your own, matchmaker mix up. Okay. We do all want to end up with a happily ever after. And this story could have gone really wrong, and it did.
Yeah, that's the thing, though. I think that probably most of them do, right? Because it is a mix-up. So, right. They're not compatible at first, but you have to find a way to get through that. And
right. Well, I was going to say, I think sometimes too, what we think we want isn't always the best. So that's where I like to let my faith come in. Is like, how would God work this out for good? This woman who's a godly woman and raised by a pastor, and her father felt like this was the right way to go, and so they trust somebody to help them. And even though it wasn't the match that she wanted, it ended up being the match that she needed.
Yeah, exactly. And you do have to have a happy ending for all these, right?
Right.
I mean, it just wouldn't work if, I don't know, it wouldn't work if they didn't work out.
Well, and I don't like reading stories. If I want to read a story like that, this particular genre is for happily ever after. So I don't want to go through all of this, these chapters, and then come to a conclusion that's not happy.
Yeah.
So.
And that's what your fan base, your readers want too.
Right. And, and I think we can be happy. We are happier than we think. We want to turn and look at what other people have and think that our lives are not enough, but actually our lives are enough. God provides us with so many things. We're so blessed in this country and this nation, and we're so blessed. We just need to reflect on the good things that we have. And I think this simpler time, and maybe that's why it appeals to me, the sort of Little House on the Prairie type time, when things were simpler and we didn't have so many distractions. We don't need all those distractions to be happy. And as a matter of fact, I think the distractions make us less so.
I think you're right. It's a really good point. Yeah. But we do have it's kind of good for us to have the technology that we do, because it helps authors like you get out there, and it's helpful in ways. But you're right, too much of it can be a bad thing.
Oh, I definitely love the technology. I can't imagine doing what I'm doing. I make so many changes when I write. I can't imagine doing this longhand, or even back in the day on the old-fashioned typewriter.
I know. I
really enjoy my PC.
Yeah. I actually have an old typewriter from, I don't know, it was my uncle's, maybe from the 1950s, and I had it out recently and was trying to type on it, and I just could not believe how difficult that was.
And please don't make a mistake.
Yeah, really. Well, we have whiteout.
Yeah.
So now these books have also been turned into audiobooks, speaking of great technology, because this is such a popular thing right now. Josh Oliver narrated the books. And so tell me a little bit about that experience, how it was to hear your books told.
Well, it's surreal in a lot of ways.
Sure.
But Josh does a great job, and he made the story come to life. And this is a type of story that you could play out loud if you have your children or your grandkids in the car. There, it's for everybody. It is specifically written for as a matchmaker mail order bride, which tends to go to the female range. But I do have men that read my work and enjoy it. So it kind of shows sort of, but it's a broad spectrum. Anybody could listen to it, and you wouldn't have to cut it off because your grandkids are in the room.
Yeah, that's a good thing.
Or your kids, or your neighbors.
Yeah.
Or your preacher.
Oh, well, there you go. Very important. So where can we find you? Do you have a website, social media accounts?
Yeah, I do. My website is KimberlyGrist.com. And I'm also on Facebook and Amazon and BookBub.
Okay. And what's coming up next?
Well, I'm in the process right now of writing. I just completed a story. It's a similar story. Bethel is a mail order bride mix-up. She is a bootlegger's daughter. And during the time after the Civil War, families and farms were destroyed, and things got really expensive. And the government needed to make up some budget issues, and they started a luxury tax. And the luxury tax was on things like pianos or jewelry. This was when the IRS was first implemented again after the Civil War. Lincoln needed to make up the deficit. So, but it hit farmers in a particular odd way. And you got to think back to the times too. Of course, I'm a Baptist preacher's wife, so should teetotaler, so to speak. But you got to think about the time frame. There was no medicines. If something happened and you needed pain relief or even cleansing, they used what they had, and they made corn liquor out of corn. But liquor was whether you used it for medicinal purposes or whether you were using it for somebody to sell as alcohol distribution, it was considered a luxury. So it was people. So you have farmers, they need cash, and they were used to converting their corn into mash and making that they sell it. So when the government came in and said, okay, we're going to charge $12 a gallon on this mash. And so people needed the money. They were farmers. They had to put food on their table, and they needed that additional cash. So that's sort of where the whole bootlegging thing started. They would make the alcohol and distribute it under the covers, so to speak, so they didn't have to pay a literal $12 a gallon tax. When I go to fill up my tank with gas now, and I think about how much I pay on taxes when you purchase gas, but can you imagine $12 a gallon during this time period? So in my story, this young woman rationalizes her selling of the product as medicinal purposes, but she's actually gotten herself involved in some things that are dangerous, and she needs to escape. And so she's a bootlegger's daughter, and she's been arrested and thrown in jail more times than she can count. But she wants to escape the life, and she is unfortunately mixed up and matched to a sheriff. So that ends up being a lot of fun too.
Huh. That's fascinating. $12 for a gallon.
Can you imagine?
Back then, no. I wonder what the equivalent would be now.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Just even thinking about paying $12 a gallon for gas, but people had to use that for that was their only pain medication, or they used it to make cough syrup, so there was some value to it, but a lot of people used it in other ways that were not so. What's the word I'm looking for? But they used it
non-essential.
Yes, definitely non-essential, and could also be detrimental. So she was involved and wanted to get out of that lifestyle, and took her, but she was mismatched to a sheriff.
Wow.
So,
That's a fascinating plot. When do you think it'll be out?
well, that one is just out. That was out recently.
Oh, great. Okay.
And it's called Bethel. The next story that I'm working on is another similar matchmaker, and that's Aveline, and she's going to be out April 24th. She's also, this is the same family. She's also her father is a bootlegger, and she needs to get away from the lifestyle. And she's going to be in a similar situation where she's also matched to somebody who is a sheriff. Now, the thing that seems the most odd about that is when you are in the lifestyle where you're running from the law, you do not trust the law, because
Sure.
they saw a lot of things where people were paid off, and at the time where with bootlegging, somebody might turn their eye and allow something to happen, or there were some wrong people on the side of the law. So it's a different time period. So you certainly would think, well, let me just go. She would like to go somewhere and just live on a farm and raise chickens. she doesn't want any part of being involved with a sheriff or law enforcement, or really, she doesn't even really want to live in town.
Okay. Well, but love is going to win out. So it's safe to say it's not going to work out that way for her, right?
Right.
Yeah.
It sounds like maybe a marriage made in heaven. Maybe not. A bootlegger's daughter, they go together and a sheriff go together like moonshine and bad decisions.
Oh, there you go.
So, not a good. And these characters have been keeping me up at night too. I got to tell you.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how I'm going to work it out at this point.
Well, you certainly can be as creative as you want, which is part of why I'm sure you love doing this.
It is. It's a lot of fun.
Good. Well, Kim, thank you so much for telling us about this. And folks, you know where to find her, where the books are. So I wish you the best of luck.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you calling. I appreciate having this conversation with you.
Absolutely. We'll talk again soon.
All right. Thank you.